A mother, trapped inside a space smaller than a coffin, not for hours, not for days, but for nearly 3 years. No sunlight ever touched her skin. No room to stand, to stretch, to breathe freely. Every movement had to be calculated. Every breath controlled. Because in that silence, even the smallest sound could betray her. Outside, soldiers searched, listened, waited, and inside she disappeared. No voice. No footsteps. No existence. Imagine living where a single cough could end your life, where your own heartbeat feels too loud, where fear never leaves. It just becomes quieter, deeper, constant. Days blurred into months, months into years. The body weakens. The world fades. But the real battle isn't outside, it's inside the mind. Because the question isn't how she survived that darkness, it's how she kept her sanity when everything inside her was breaking. World War II. A continent swallowed by fear. Across Nazi-occupied Europe, entire families were hunted down, forced into hiding, stripped of identity, erased from existence as if they had never lived at all. For Jewish families, survival no longer meant fighting back. It meant disappearing. No documents. No legal protection. No safe place to run. Only silence. Only shadows. Only hiding. Neighbors became informants. Streets became traps. Even walls felt like they were listening. Every knock on the door could be the last. Every night could end everything. And in this world, where being seen meant death, one mother made a choice that would define her survival. She didn't run.
She didn't resist.
She vanished into a space so small it was never meant for living. A closet.
Dark.
Airless. Suffocating. A place where time would stop, but fear would not. She stepped inside, believing it might be temporary. A few days, maybe weeks, until it was safe. But safety never came. Days turned into months. Months turned into something unimaginable. She didn't come out. Not once. Not for sunlight. Not for air. Not for freedom. For 900 days she remained hidden. Alive, but barely existing. The space was barely wide enough to sit in. She couldn't stand upright, couldn't stretch her arms, couldn't even cough without fear tightening her throat. Every sound mattered. A shifting foot. A broken breath. A creaking floorboard. Because sound didn't stay hidden here. It traveled through thin walls like betrayal. Outside, the world continued in brutal rhythm. Soldiers marched past. Boots struck the ground like warnings. Doors slammed in distant rooms. Voices barked orders in a language that meant danger. Inside the closet, time stopped existing. There was no morning, no night, only darkness and waiting. At first, her mind rebelled against the silence. Panic exploded inside her chest. Her heart raced uncontrollably. Breath came too fast, too loud. Her entire body screamed one command: move, run, escape. But there was nowhere to go. No escape route. No second chance. Only stillness. So the human brain did something terrifying and remarkable. It began to adapt. It learned to shrink fear into silence, to compress panic into control, to survive by rewriting its own instincts. Because when escape is impossible, the mind doesn't stop fighting. It starts surviving in a completely different way. Humans are not built for confinement. The mind is designed for movement, for light, for connection. When those are stripped away, something inside begins to break down slowly, silently. In extreme isolation, the brain starts to fracture in ways that are almost invisible at first. Time loses meaning. Minutes feel like hours. Hours collapse into nothing. Thoughts stop flowing forward and begin looping, replaying the same fears, the same memories, the same questions over and over again. And fear, it doesn't come in moments anymore. It becomes constant. A background noise that never turns off. But inside that collapse, something else begins to rise. Stronger than panic. Stronger than exhaustion. Maternal instinct. She wasn't surviving for herself alone. She was protecting a child. And that single truth changed everything. Fear no longer controlled her. It became something she controlled. Silence wasn't just survival anymore. It became discipline. Every action had weight. Every sound had consequence. Even breathing was no longer automatic. She trained herself to exist differently. Slow inhale, controlled, deliberate. Even slower exhale, as quiet as possible. No sudden movement. No emotional release. No breaking under pressure. Because in that world, emotion wasn't just weakness. It was danger. And danger made noise. The greatest threat was never just starvation. It wasn't the soldiers outside. It wasn't even the constant fear of being discovered. It was something far more dangerous, something she could not escape. Losing control of her own mind. Imagine this kind of existence. Days passing without a single word spoken aloud. Weeks without seeing natural light. Months without standing upright. Without feeling the world properly around you. In such conditions, the human brain does something unsettling. It begins to break its own boundaries. Reality starts to distort. At first, it is subtle. A shadow that moves slightly wrong. A sound that doesn't belong. A moment of doubt. Did that really happen? Then it grows stronger. Hallucinations begin to slip in like unwanted guests. Whispers echo in the silence, even when no one is there. Footsteps appear in empty rooms. Doors seem to open and close without reason. Time becomes unreliable. Memories no longer feel stable. Past and present begin to blur together. What is real and what is imagined starts to mix, like ink spreading through water. The mind, starved of stimulation, begins to do what it was never meant to do. It creates. It builds its own world inside the darkness. But this world is not comforting. It is unstable, unpredictable, sometimes terrifying. Because when the brain is forced into isolation for too long, it does not remain passive. It becomes active in the worst possible way. It starts generating reality from fear, memory, and imagination. And the most frightening part? It feels real. Completely real. So real that she could no longer trust her own senses. In that moment, the enemy was no longer outside the closet. It was inside her mind, and it was learning how to speak louder than reality itself. There were moments when she almost broke. Not slowly, not quietly, but all at once, like something inside her was about to collapse under its own weight. Panic would rise without warning, sharp and uncontrollable, flooding her chest until it felt impossible to breathe. In those moments, she wanted to scream, to tear open the silence, to run, even if there was nowhere to go, to end this unbearable stillness that pressed against her from every direction. But she never did, because every time the breaking point came, one thought cut through everything else. If I make a sound, my child dies. It wasn't just fear. It was certainty. And that certainty became more powerful than panic itself. That single belief turned into something she could hold on to when everything else was slipping away. It became her anchor in a world with no ground. Her reason to stay still when every nerve in her body begged her to move. Her prison because it trapped her in silence. And her salvation because that same silence kept her alive. In the darkest moments, when her mind was at its weakest and fear was at its loudest, she didn't rely on hope or courage. She relied on that one unshakable truth. Stay silent. Stay still. Survive. Because in that hidden space, survival was no longer about strength. It was about restraint and the terrifying discipline of not being human in the way fear demanded. One day, it almost ended. It didn't come slowly. It came like a storm breaking through silence. At first, just faint voices outside the room. Distant. Unclear. But then they grew louder. Closer than ever before. German soldiers. Searching. Systematically. Methodically. Room by room. Her entire body froze before she even had time to think. The door handle moved. The door opened. Light spilled into the room in a way that felt almost violent after so long in darkness. Footsteps entered. Heavy. Controlled. Certain. Inside the room. Closer. 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 Each step felt like it was landing inside her chest. She could hear everything now. The fabric of their uniforms, the shifting of their weight, even their breathing as they scanned the space. And then, a pause. Complete silence. One soldier stopped, right in front of the closet. Time didn't slow down. It disappeared completely. In that moment, her entire life collapsed into a single point of existence. This tiny space, this locked door, and the sound of a man deciding whether to open it. If he opened it, it was over. For her child, for everyone who depended on her silence. Her body betrayed her. Her heart began pounding violently, uncontrollably, like it was trying to escape her chest. Each beat felt louder than the footsteps outside. She was certain they could hear it. This was the moment where human instinct fails, where fear takes control, where survival ends. But something inside her refused to break. She made a decision that wasn't conscious, it was primal. She slowed everything. Her body, her thoughts, her fear, even her breath. She forced it into nothingness. No movement, no sound, no existence. She didn't hide. She didn't try to survive in the normal sense. She became stillness itself, as if even thought could betray her. Seconds stretched into something unbearable, no longer time, but pressure. And then, the footsteps shifted. They moved away. The door began to close. And just like that, the moment passed. She remained in the darkness, still alive. In extreme life or death situations, the human body doesn't always respond with fight or flight. There is a third, far more hidden response. It's called tonic immobility. This is not a choice. It is not strategy. It is a built-in survival mechanism deep inside the nervous system. When the brain perceives that escape is impossible and movement could increase danger, it can trigger a complete freeze response. The body becomes almost unresponsive. Heart rate slows down dramatically. Muscles become rigid or completely still. Breathing becomes shallow and barely noticeable. Even emotional reactions seem to shut down temporarily, as if the mind is disconnecting from the body. To an outside observer, it might look like weakness or collapse. But in reality, it is the opposite. It is the brain's last attempt to keep the person alive when all other options fail. There is no conscious control in this state. No decision-making. No bravery involved. It is pure biology. A survival code written deep within human evolution. In her situation, inside that suffocating silence, when soldiers stood just steps away, her body didn't choose to be still. It was forced into stillness by the nervous system itself. And that stillness created the smallest possible chance of survival. Because movement would have revealed her. Sound would have ended everything. But complete stillness made her invisible. So in that terrifying moment, what looked like absolute helplessness was actually a biological defense mechanism taking over. And in her case, this involuntary freeze response didn't just happen. It became the reason she lived through the moment that should have ended everything. But survival didn't end there. Days slowly turned into months, and months quietly stretched into years. With time, her body began to change in ways she never imagined. Her muscles, once strong and responsive, started to weaken from lack of movement. Her joints grew stiff, resisting even the smallest effort to bend or stretch. Something as simple as standing up would eventually feel like learning to walk all over again, as if her body had forgotten its own language. But the deeper damage was not only physical, it was psychological. Time had blurred her sense of reality until she could no longer clearly remember what a normal life felt like. Simple things like casual conversation, the warmth of sunlight on her skin, or the feeling of freedom in an open space began to fade from memory. Her entire world had slowly shrunk into a confined space of darkness, silence, and isolation, where each day felt almost identical to the last. And yet, despite everything, she endured. Even when hope felt distant and time seemed endless, something within her refused to give up completely. In the quietest corners of her existence, survival still continued, steady, silent, and unbroken. After 900 days, the war finally came to an end. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the door was opened. A sudden rush of light flooded the space, sharp and blinding, as if the world itself was breathing again. It was overwhelming, too bright, too real, too different from the darkness she had learned to survive in. She hesitated for a moment, her body weak and unsteady, as though unsure whether it still belonged to the outside world. Then, slowly, she stepped forward, out into a world that had continued moving on without her. A world that had changed, healed, and forgotten the silence she had lived through. Nothing looked the same anymore, and yet everything felt familiar in a distant, painful way. But she was alive, and so was her child. In that fragile, trembling moment, nothing else mattered. Not the time lost, not the pain endured, not the years stolen from her life. Because against everything they had survived. And that was the only victory that truly mattered. So, how does the human mind not break? The truth is not comforting. It does break. It bends under pressure it was never designed to carry. It distorts reality just to make the unbearable feel survivable. It fractures in silence, piece by piece, without warning. But survival is not always about remaining intact. Sometimes, when the conditions are extreme and escape is not an option, the mind does something unexpected. It adapts. It begins to rebuild itself, not into what it once was, but into something entirely different. Something quieter, where emotions are muted just enough to function. Something stronger, not in the way strength is usually understood, but in its ability to continue existing despite everything. Something reshaped by time, isolation, and necessity. And in that transformation, there is a strange kind of resilience. Because even after everything, even after 900 days in the dark, the mind learns not just to survive, but to keep going.